When I asked my father for a 15% stake in the logistics system I built from scratch, he laughed in my face, right in front of my younger brother, and called me a computer geek. 6 months later, his company went bankrupt. And me? I'm now vice president at his biggest competitor. My name is Jackson Hale. I'm 33 years old, and this is the story of how my own father, Charles Hale, turned the smartest person in the family into a nobody until he lost everything. I used to believe that if I worked hard enough, if I poured my time into building systems, writing code, solving problems, someday they'd see me. I was wrong. I was the systems director at Hale Freight Company, a logistics company my father founded in Savannah, Georgia. For 12 years, I worked out of a basement room with no windows, where the company's entire server infrastructure lived, powering thousands of shipments each week. No suits, no golf meetings, no executive leather chair. But I had something no one else did. A brain that could automate logistics so efficiently, it terrified our competitors. When I created the Hydra engine, an AI system that slashed operating costs by 45% and doubled delivery speed, we landed a billion-dollar contract with Genesis Global Logistics. That should have been my moment. But instead, my father gave the credit to my brother Kyle, who didn't even know the system could optimize itself in real time. I stood backstage, gripping a plastic cup of water, watching my father pat Kyle on the back and say, "You're the one head who changed the future of Hale Freight." And right then, I realized something. In this place, talent didn't matter. Only appearances did. That was the moment I started planning my exit. Not to run away, but to take back what I deserved. I was born and raised in Savannah, a historic port city where the humid heat and scent of salt cling to every brick on the sidewalk. My family owned Hale Freight, one of the oldest logistics companies along the southeastern coast of the U.S. That red truck logo featuring an anchor wrapped in a lightning bolt was stamped on shipping containers from Georgia to North Carolina. From a young age, I knew, in my father's eyes, I was never the heir. I was the quiet eldest son, drawn to wires and circuit boards, introverted, a little odd. My father, Charles Hale, was the classic Southern businessman, booming voice, firm handshake, big laughter when he was winning, and even louder when he wasn't. To him, success meant cocktail parties at the marina, post-golf handshakes, and roaring laughter during boardroom deals. To me, success was building an AI smart enough to coordinate thousands of delivery routes without human input. It was getting hundreds of drivers to their destinations on time, with no missing shipments, no warehouse chaos, and making it all look effortless. I made that happen, quietly, no spotlight, no award, no one even knew. Not even Kyle, my younger brother, understood how the system worked, but he was always called the ideal successor. Tall, charming, a Vanderbilt business grad with a smile that could win over the toughest client. My father once told a reporter, "Kyle's got what I had when I was younger, confidence and leadership. And me, the older one's good at programming or whatever, keeps the servers from catching fire." I used to brush it off. I thought if I just did good enough work, the results would speak for themselves. But after 12 years, what did I get? Not a single word of recognition during annual reviews. Never invited to strategic client meetings. Not one photo in the company newsletter, even though I built the backbone of the entire distribution network. I was the guy from the server room, as Kyle liked to joke whenever he stopped by dispatch. But I wasn't angry. I wasn't jealous. I was just tired. Every day, I walked into that basement server room with flickering fluorescent lights and AC that never turned off. I ate lunch there, shipped out hundreds of lines of code from there, and watch my dream roll out across the country, packaged in Hale freight trucks that bore my family's name, but never mine. I had resigned myself to that life until the day of the Genesis Global Celebration, our biggest deal ever. The moment I saw my name missing from the speakers list, I knew nothing had changed. Still, I hoped. Then my father stepped on stage to roaring applause and called Kyle the architect of our strategic leap forward. I clenched my fists, holding back the disappointment. I thought I'd grown numb to that feeling, until I heard a woman whisper behind me, "That system, the server guy built it, right? What's his name again? Jackson." And in that moment, my heart ached. For the first time in years, no one but me knew that the system now being branded a forward-thinking creative platform by Kyle on stage was something I built over the course of 87 sleepless nights. And yes, I counted. It wasn't just a string of optimization algorithms. It was my life's work. Every line of code I wrote, every machine learning loop, every real-time freight balancing command, every emergency failover map between regional hubs, I did it all. I built Hydra to learn, adapt, and refine daily routing decisions based on 12 dynamic factors, from weather conditions and road closures to fuel prices and real-time driver behavior, and no one, not a single soul, understood how it worked except me. Hydra was the reason Genesis Global Logistics, a global freight titan notorious for distrusting small family-run firms, signed a 10-year contract worth nearly $800 million with Hale Freight. During the demo, Hydra cut their projected shipping costs by 38% and accelerated delivery times across the Eastern Corridor by an average of 2.4 days. I remember that demo like it was yesterday. Malcolm Dyer, the quiet CEO of Genesis, stood up after 20 minutes of simulation, looked at me, and said, "If this thing runs like that in real life, you just rewrote the rules of logistics." I nodded, didn't say a word, because I already knew I wouldn't be the one they'd remember. And I was right. Kyle, with his polished delivery and a PowerPoint deck curated by Ruby Morales, was the face of it all. I just sat at the far end of the table next to an outlet and a tangled mess of Ethernet cables, but I didn't care. I just wanted the system to work. I wanted it to save the company, protect the jobs, keep trucks running on time without delays due to missing data. I never expected that my greatest achievement would be handed entirely to someone else. After the deal was signed, Kyle landed on the cover of Southeast Business Chronicle under a bold headline, "The Face of Next Gen Freight: How the Hale Brothers Are Disrupting Logistics." Hale Brothers. I let out a dry laugh. I wasn't a Hale brother. I was the one in the shadows, the one who laid the foundation for an entire operating system. But I had no place on the family stage. That night, back in my small apartment near the docks, I booted up Hydra. I watched as the numbers flowed, seamless, rhythmic, like a perfectly tuned symphony. And in that moment, I realized something painfully clear. I had just handed over my soul to people who never even learned how to say its name. 3 days after the contract was signed, the company threw a grand celebration at the Riverfront Grand Hotel, an old landmark overlooking the Savannah River, once known for hosting governors' galas. The guest list? A little bit of everything. Partners, vendors, local officials, and a few reporters from industry magazines. They'd set up an outdoor stage, live jazz band, premium wine tables, and white lanterns swaying gently between rows of old oak trees. They called it a historic milestone for Hale Freight. I arrived on time wearing the same suit my mother had bought me for my college graduation. No one recognized me. I poured myself a glass of soda. no ice, and quietly made my way to the back corner, just close enough to see the stage, just far enough to stay invisible. Everyone I greeted offered a polite nod, then turned away. They didn't know who I was, and they didn't care. Kyle, on the other hand, was in his element. He was laughing, shaking hands with confidence, joking with my father's longtime clients like he'd known them for decades. I overheard someone say, "That Kyle kid, he's like a carbon copy of Charles back in the day." I drained my soda. The band stopped playing. The lights shifted toward the stage. My father stepped up, wearing a black tuxedo, that signature confident smile lighting up his face like he was about to announce an election win. "Thank you all for being here tonight. This contract with Genesis isn't just a financial milestone, it's a statement. Hale Freight remains the beacon of the Southern Coastal Corridor." I stood still, waiting for something, just a name, a glance, even a nod. "And of course," he continued, his voice booming through the mic, "the person I want to thank most tonight, none other than our Vice President of Strategic Development, my son, Kyle Hale." The applause hit me like a hammer to the chest. Kyle took the stage, hugging our father, waving like a rock star. Dad called him the architect of our future, the perfect successor, a role model for the next generation of logistics leaders. I forced a smile. An older woman next to me leaned over and asked, "Which department are you in, sweetheart?" I answered simply, "Engineering." She nodded as if that explained everything, then turned away. My father closed out the speech, raising his glass. "We couldn't have gotten here without the incredible people behind the scenes. Folks from the engineering department, for example, keeping the systems running. You guys, great job." I didn't mishear that. Engineering department? Not Jackson, not my eldest son, not the man who built Hydra Engine, just a nameless group in the background. I looked around. No one clapped this time. They'd already returned to sipping wine, talking business, nibbling cold lobster. I just stood there, watching the spotlight shine on Kyle's face, and I knew one thing for sure. I was no longer part of the Hale family. And maybe I never really was. I stood silently by the half-empty buffet, staring at the cold shrimp skewers and dry cubes of cheese left behind on tiny plates. No one noticed me, and I was used to that. But this time, it felt different, colder, emptier, as if I had just been officially written out of the very story I helped author. A deep, familiar voice came from behind me. "I thought they'd at least let you say a few words, but clearly, I gave them too much credit." I turned. It was Ruby Morales, Senior Project Director. She'd been at Hale Freight since the days my father used to drive trucks himself. A sharp, no-nonsense woman known for her brains and grit, but her eyes always held a warmth when she looked at the engineers. She held a glass of red wine, untouched. Her gaze met mine, not with pity, but with something I hadn't seen in a long time. Understanding. "Jackson," she said softly, "aren't you tired?" I let out a half laugh. "Of course I'm tired, but I'm used to it. No, I mean, tired of building a machine that reshaped the company only to watch someone else take the credit. Tired of being treated like office equipment, useful when needed, invisible when not." I said nothing. Ruby set her glass on the table, crossed her arms, and lowered her voice like she was about to say something forbidden. "I've seen this happen before, Jackson, to women in this industry, to immigrants, to the ones who actually have the skills but don't fit the suit and tie mold. They get ignored, overlooked, and only when they leave does the company realize who they were. But in your case, if you don't stand up for yourself, they'll never know. And worse, they'll never care." I looked at her. A strange warmth spread down my spine, rising from the hollowness in my chest.
Ruby, I don't know what to do.
I've spent half my life here. I don't want to disappoint my father. I don't want to cause drama. She cut in, sharp but steady. That's your problem, Jackson. You're waiting for permission to be the person you've already become. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. If I speak up, they'll say I'm being greedy. She stepped closer. No, they'll say you're arrogant, because weak people hate watching someone else walk out of the cage. But if you don't, they'll keep you locked in there forever. She paused, her voice low and deliberate. You're not just some employee here, Jackson. You're the backbone of this entire operation. They survive on what you've built. And now it's time to ask yourself, do you want to stay a shadow or finally become who you are? I didn't answer, but my eyes did, and Ruby knew. She gave my shoulder a gentle pat, then turned and walked away, leaving me in the haze of jazz music and soft, flickering lights. I looked around the ballroom one last time, and for the first time, I saw it clearly. I was standing in a place that no longer belonged to me. 2 days after the gala, I sent a short email to my father's assistant. I'd like to schedule a private meeting with Mr. Charles Hale to discuss my future and role at Hale Freight as soon as possible. Janelle, who had known me since I was 15, replied with a single line, Friday, 8 o'clock a.m., 8th floor conference room. Don't be late. I spent 2 nights preparing. I printed every relevant document on Hydra Engine. Performance metrics, post-deployment, cost-saving data, efficiency reports, customer feedback, everything. I assembled a 38-page packet, clear, concise, structured, like a valuation dossier. I also included a market salary analysis for equivalent roles at competing firms. And finally, I printed my proposal, title, Chief Technology Officer, salary 10% below industry median, equity, offer 15%, reflecting 12 years of contribution and proprietary platform IP. I arrived 15 minutes early, sat alone in the mahogany paneled conference room, sunlight slanting through the windows, glinting off the water glass in front of me. Then I heard it, the familiar heavy footsteps. My father entered, no greeting, and behind him was Kyle. I froze. I thought this was a private meeting. My father pulled out a chair without looking at me. Kyle's here to observe. He's going to be running the company one day. Go ahead, Jackson. What do you want? I took a breath, placed the packet on the table, and kept my voice steady. I want to be formally recognized as part of the leadership team. Specifically, I'm requesting the CTO title, fair compensation, and a 15% equity stake, proportional to the IP I created, integrated, and that now powers the company's entire logistics infrastructure. Silence. 5 seconds of it. Then Kyle laughed. 15%? Seriously? You think this whole company runs on code? My father leaned back in his chair, picked up his silver pen, and twirled it slowly. Jackson, you're brilliant with tech. I've never denied that, but you've never closed a deal. You've never retained a major client, never raised capital, never led a sales team. You're a smart machine, and I do value that. I stared at him, unblinking. A machine? He nodded without hesitation. Like a generator. Useful. Needed. But no one gives stock to a generator. You should be grateful I pay you on time. I couldn't breathe for a moment. Kyle leaned back, smirking. Maybe take a few days off. Chill out. You've been a little tense lately. My father folded his arms. And if you really think you're that valuable, go out there and see what people are willing to pay for a code writer, but don't expect 15% here. This company was built with my hands, with sweat, not with keyboard games. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just nodded, stood up. The document stayed on the table, untouched, unopened. I looked at my father one last time and said quietly, I used to believe loyalty would be rewarded, but now I understand. Around here, effort means nothing if you don't fit the mold. I walked out. The heavy wooden door closed behind me. Inside, I heard Kyle chuckle. Chief Technology Officer. More like Chief Typing Operator. I didn't look back, because for the first time in my life, I no longer needed their approval. The morning after the meeting with my father and Kyle, I didn't go to work. I didn't open my laptop. I just sat on the balcony of my 5th-floor apartment, staring at the slow-moving Savannah River under a hazy morning sun. And one sentence kept echoing in my mind. You're a generator. No one gives stock to a generator. A part of me wanted to throw everything behind me, but the other part wanted to prove him wrong, not with words, but with action. I stood up, opened the wooden drawer, and pulled out an old notebook. The first page still carried faint blue ink. Hydra, Core Vice Point 1, written at Georgia Tech Lab, March 2012. Over a decade ago, I had built the very first version of that system. Back then, I hadn't signed an employment contract with Hale Freight, and I never officially transferred intellectual property rights to anyone. That thought sparked like a slow-burning fuse. I opened my laptop, logged into LinkedIn, typed 3 words, Wesley Knox. Seconds later, the name popped up, CEO and founder of Iron Bridge Freight Systems, Hale Freight's direct competitor on the Eastern Seaboard, the man my father once called that city fox. Because Wesley didn't rely on tradition, he relied on data, technology, and modern strategy. I'd met him once 2 years ago after a tech summit in Atlanta. He'd shaken my hand and said, if you ever get tired of watching others take credit for your work, come find me. I'd laughed it off. Not anymore. I sent a short message. Mr. Knox, the time has come. Less than 20 minutes later, he replied, I've been waiting for this message, Jackson. Dinner at 7. Old Harbor Grill. That evening, I wore a white dress shirt, no tie, and walked into the waterfront restaurant, once home to Iron Bridge's first office. Inside, Wesley was already seated, a glass of bourbon in front of him, his gaze sharp, like a general assessing a defector from the other side. I'm not going to ask why you're here, he said, motioning for me to sit. I just want to know, what did you bring? I placed a leather bag on the table, unzipped it, pulled out a hard drive and a bound set of documents. Hydra, from the very first design, before Hale Freight even knew that name existed. Wesley leaned back, arms crossed, eyes narrowing with interest. They never had you sign an IP transfer? I shook my head. They assumed that because I was the son, anything I created automatically belonged to them. Silence. Then slowly Wesley nodded. Then this isn't a family dispute. This is a case of intellectual property reclamation. I answered calmly. It's not a leak. It's a retrieval. I'm just taking back what's mine. And he looked at me, and for the first time he smiled. A real one. Then welcome to the other side. A week after that night at Old Harbor Grill, I walked into the headquarters of Iron Bridge Freight Systems, hard drive in hand, heart pounding in my chest. Not out of fear, but because for the first time in years, I was about to be heard as someone who actually mattered. They led me into a closed-door conference room. Inside were Wesley Knox, the head of engineering, and Donna Ellis, Iron Bridge's senior intellectual property attorney. No pleasantries, no coffee, no where would you like to sit, just business. I connected the hard drive and began presenting Hydra Core's origins, the original schematics, creation timestamps, scanned notebook pages from the Georgia Tech Lab, build versions dating from 2012 to 2015, all of it predating any employment contract with Hale Freight. Dana flipped through each page like she was dissecting a criminal case. Her expression stayed unreadable, but I noticed every time she marked something, Wesley gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Then I explained. The first version of Hydra was developed entirely on my personal devices in an academic setting, using my own email and outside company hours. When I joined Hale Freight, I used it to build additional application layers, but the core engine, the optimization algorithms, the computational backbone was my personal work. 40 minutes passed in silence before Dana finally spoke. Did you ever sign an IP transfer agreement with Hale Freight? No, they never asked. Did they compensate you for the rights? No. She nodded, calm, clinical, like reading a verdict. Under federal law, especially in software and creative IP, if a person develops a system on personal hardware, on their own time and outside the scope of any formal work contract, ownership defaults to the individual. Wesley looked at me, which means if Hydra is the backbone of Hale Freight's logistics system, they're running an entire company on technology they don't legally own. I sat up straighter. It was clear now. All the sleepless nights, all the years of being dismissed, called the tech guy, brushed aside. Now it had weight. I don't want to sue, I said. I just want them to understand everything they're depending on is borrowed, and that loan is coming due. Dana smiled for the first time in the meeting. Then we don't file a lawsuit first. We make an offer. Wesley folded his hands together. I'll have our engineers review Hydra. If it's as good as you say, and I believe it is, we'll build a new system, stronger, cleaner, smarter. And the IP, I asked. We'll draft an exclusive acquisition agreement for Hydra V1.0, fair market value. On top of that, a new title, Vice President of Systems Innovation, equity in the project, and an office at our new Charlotte headquarters. Not just to build tech, but to lead a new era. I looked at the stack of documents on the table, the evidence I had quietly accumulated over the years. No longer just a personal archive. Now it was a weapon, not for revenge, but to declare true value, once placed in the right hands, can reshape an entire system. 3 months after that closed-door meeting at Iron Bridge, I received an official notice from Hale Freight's legal team. The subject line was as cold as it was concise. Notice of lawsuit, alleged intellectual property misappropriation. My father, Chase, had chosen war. No negotiation, no phone call, not even a personal message. He sued me, his own son, for stealing proprietary technology and selling trade secrets to a direct competitor. He demanded over $100 million in damages. But what he didn't know was, I had already prepared for this. And this time, I wasn't alone. The mandatory federal mediation was held in a glass tower in Atlanta, 29th floor, sterile conference room, AC too cold for comfort. On my side, Iron Bridge's legal team, led by Dana Ellis, the one person in a suit I trusted with everything. Across the table, my father, ice cold, Kyle, no smirk this time, and their attorney, Gerald Monroe, a retired federal prosecutor with a jaw like granite and a voice that didn't need a mic. Monroe opened with a 25-minute presentation, charts, emails, server logs. He tried to paint a picture that I had secretly copied company data and handed it to Ironbridge. With no small amount of smugness, he declared, Mr. Jackson Hale abused the trust of his family, used company resources to develop private technology, and then sold it. A serious breach of ethics and federal law. My father didn't look at me, not once. Then came Dana's turn. She didn't say much. She opened her laptop and started a video call. An older woman appeared on the screen. Silver hair, thin-framed glasses, voice slow but firm. I'm Ellen Marks, former CFO of Hale Freight. I retired this past March after 27 years with the company. Dana asked, during your tenure, did Hale Freight ever execute any contract to acquire or own Mr. Jackson Hale's intellectual property? No. In fact, I submitted 3 internal memos recommending we sign formal transfer agreements with Jackson regarding the Hydra system, but Mr. Charles Hale refused. He said, and I quote, "He's my son. What's his is mine." Across the table, Kyle's head dropped. Gerald Monroe went pale. Dana kept going. She placed on the table a scanned copy of my handwritten notebook, dated 2012, before I ever joined the company. The hard drive with metadata showing Hydra's files were created pre-employment. An independent legal audit confirming the system's core components did not belong to Hale Freight. And finally, Dana slid a single A4 sheet across the table to my father. This isn't a lawsuit. This is a choice. On it, a retroactive licensing invoice charging Hale Freight for 8 years of unauthorized use of Hydra. The number was staggering. Paying it would require liquidating most of the company, or sign an agreement to cease using Hydra within 72 hours. Which meant the entire logistics operation would collapse at its core. Every route, every report, every delivery chain, gone. I looked at my father, and for the first time, I saw it. Not fear of losing the case, but the realization that I was right. This is betrayal, he hissed through clenched teeth. I replied, calm and clear, no. This is the bill coming due. The room fell silent, like a tomb. And just then, a real storm broke outside, thunder rolling behind the glass. A perfect coincidence. Or maybe not. My father didn't sign. Right there in that mediation room, he slammed his hand on the table, shoved the licensing invoice aside like it was garbage, and stood up. I'd rather watch this company die than pay a single cent to my ungrateful son. Kyle stood too, face pale. Gerald Monroe silently gathered the documents. No one said a word. 72 hours later, as promised by Dana Ellis, Hydra was pulled from every Hale Freight server. No malware, no sabotage, just simple legal revocation. They no longer had the right to use it. And then, everything started to collapse. Within 5 days, everything I'd quietly feared for over a decade finally came true. Trucks took the wrong routes. Deliveries ran 4 to 5 days late. The Charleston hub reported phantom inventory spikes. 6-fold GPS tracking systems failed. Clients kept calling, but no one dared to pick up. Some longtime partners officially terminated their contracts. An internal report from an old friend still inside the company summed it up in one sentence. It's like trying to replace an airplane engine while flying over the Atlantic. Less than 2 weeks later, Hale Freight announced emergency layoffs. 172 people lost their jobs. Some of them were people I'd once considered family. Miss Caroline from customer service, who used to send holiday cookies to the tech team every Christmas. Tony, The maintenance engineer who taught me how to reset a server my first week. Jared, the guy who taught me to drive the yard truck. Because even the boss's kid should understand real operations. Their messages started filling my inbox. No blame, just, I got the notice. Looking for new work. Hope you're doing okay. And then, on a rainy afternoon in Savannah, I got a message from Ruby Morales, the one who pulled me back when I nearly gave up. I was officially let go today, so was the entire project team. I read that message 3 times. It felt like the floor had dropped out beneath me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by my window watching the harbor lights fade behind the rain, and I thought, did I just destroy not only a company, but hundreds of families? I knew, legally, the responsibility was my father's. He refused to pay. He refused to negotiate. He chose war over resolution. But still, I felt guilty. I wasn't trying to destroy anything. I wasn't seeking revenge. All I ever wanted was to be acknowledged, to be called by my name. But now, Jackson Hale was the name showing up in hundreds of termination emails, a wave I couldn't stop. I knew I couldn't save everyone, but I also knew I had to do something, not to make amends, not out of guilt, but to prove you can win without losing your humanity. I no longer carry the Hale name on any professional document, but I still carry it in my heart. And it had never felt heavier until my mother called me. We hadn't spoken in almost a year. Her voice trembled slightly over the phone. Jackson, I know you don't want to hear from me right now, but I need to see you. Not for the company, for the family. I said nothing. She continued, her voice dropping lower as if holding something back. Your father, he doesn't leave his room anymore. He barely eats, doesn't speak to anyone, just sits there, staring out the window. I agreed to come. 3 days later, I returned to the old 2-story wooden house on the west side of Savannah, the place where I'd spent my childhood with Mom, Dad, and the person who used to be my brother. The house looked the same, only the garden had grown wild. My mother opened the door. Her hair had gone grayer. She pulled me into a hug. Tight. She didn't say anything, but her breath trembled against my shoulder. I didn't pull away. I just gave her 3 gentle pats on the back, enough for her to know I was still here. We had dinner, just the 3 of us. My father never came down. The meal was quiet. Mom talked about the weather, about neighbors who had moved, about the lemon tree out back bearing fruit again. No one mentioned the company. No one mentioned the lawsuit. Until Kyle put his knife down, let out a long breath, and said softly, I don't even know where to start. I looked at him. No suit, no polished grin, just a younger brother, exhausted, unsure, and finally honest. That day, he continued, when you walked out of that boardroom, I knew it was over. There was no coming back from it. I stayed quiet. I waited. I used to be jealous of you, Jackson. Since we were kids, Mom always said you were the smart one. Teachers always picked you to lead. I never understood what you built, but I knew you had something I never did. The ability to create something real. I could talk, sure, I could stand in front of people, but you made things that mattered. He looked me in the eyes for the first time in years, and this time he didn't look away. I laughed when Dad shut you down, not because it made me happy, but because I was scared that if they saw your worth, there'd be nothing left for me. I was wrong, I know that, and I'm sorry. This time I didn't turn away. I gave a small nod. I don't need a speech, Kyle, just the truth. That's enough. No hugs, no tears, just silence. And in that silence, we bawlitsi. We both stepped across something neither of us thought possible. As I stood to leave, Mom reached for my hand. Her eyes searched mine. Your father, he lost the company, lost friends, lost himself. But what broke him most was losing you. I answered softly. I didn't go anywhere. I just couldn't live the same way anymore. She nodded, didn't beg, didn't cling. She just placed a hand on my cheek and smiled, gently, like she used to when I fell as a kid and was too proud to cry. On the drive back, I didn't feel relief, but I did feel clarity. Not every wound needs to heal overnight, but understanding, true, honest understanding, can be a beginning. And for me, that was enough. 2 years after I walked away from Hale Freight, everything had changed. The company's old headquarters, the one where I once sat coding in the basement, had been sold off and converted into a shared office space. The red truck and anchor logo had been taken down. No one talked about Hale Freight as the pride of the coastal South anymore. On industry forums, the name had become a textbook case in failed leadership and undervalued internal talent. My father no longer appeared in public. I heard he lives quietly in the old house, sometimes walking laps in the backyard. I'm not ready to see him again, but I'm no longer angry, and I'm not the same Jackson I once was. At Ironbridge, I now serve as Executive Vice President of Innovation. Hydra wasn't just fully deployed, it evolved into Aegis, a next-gen system that adapts to geographic behavior and consumer habits in real time. But the thing I'm most proud of isn't in any tech report or billion-dollar contract. It's something called the Forge Initiative. Together with our CEO, Wesley Knox, we launched the fund after seeing hundreds of brilliant engineers, designers, and young inventors get pushed aside because they didn't know how to pitch themselves or play office politics. They had talent, but they were crushed by systems that valued style over substance. The Forge supports them, not just with funding, but with IP protection lawyers, tech mentors, and dedicated labs to experiment freely. We don't invest in big corporations. We look for the invisible ones, the past versions of me, so they won't have to burn down a family or sue a company just to be seen. Just the other day, during an internal pitch session, I met a young female engineer. Her eyes sparkled just like mine did at 22. When the executive panel started hammering her with business model questions, I raised my hand and said, "Let's set market share aside for a second. I just have one question. Do you have a plan to protect your intellectual property?" She stared at me, stunned for a moment. Then she laughed like she'd just been freed from something heavy. And I knew I was on the right path. My victory wasn't the fall of Hale Freight. It was learning how to build a world where people like me never have to be treated the way I once was. A world where every line of code, every idea, every quiet dream is seen, valued, and protected. Because the true worth of a person isn't measured by how many compliments they receive, but by how much value they create for others without needing permission. Thank you for listening to my story. And if you, even once, have had to fight just to be recognized in your family, in your job, or in your life, then remember this: you don't need permission to have worth. You already have it. You were never the extra. You were always enough.